She walked into that elite jiu-jitsu academy with quiet eyes, calloused hands, and no one bothering to ask who she was. Within weeks, they laughed at her, mocked her, told her she didn't belong, just another ordinary black woman out of place. But they didn't know that she'd taught hand-to-hand combat in war zones, carried soldiers out of fire, and wore her silence like armor. One instructor tried to humiliate her in front of the whole class. What happened next silenced the entire martial arts community in just 14 seconds. This isn't just a revenge story. It's about legacy strength without noise and the quiet warrior who changed everything when no one was watching. You'll want to stay for every second of this one. Imani Brooks didn't flinch as the instructor's legs swept hers out from under her. One moment she was standing on the polished mat of the Apex Jiu-Jitsu Academy, and the next, she was on her back, the thud of her body echoing across the silent training room like a gunshot. Her breath caught in her chest, not from pain, but from the wave of humiliation washing over her. Laughter erupted around her almost instantly, the kind of laughter that doesn't come from amusement, but from a cruel delight in someone else's fall. And she knew this laugh too well. It had followed her in different forms all her life, from the playgrounds of Georgia to the battlefields overseas. But here in a pristine dojo in the wealthiest part of Boston, it rang sharper than ever. Instructor Blake Thompson, tall, broad, and every bit the ex-MMA fighter he bragged about, being stood over her with a smug smile curling beneath his chiseled jaw. His black belt, tightly tied and prominently displayed, might as well have been a crown. "Ladies like you," he said loudly, hands on his hips, addressing both Imani and the watching class, belong in spin class, not on these mats. The students snickered. A few held their phones half hidden, pretending to film their footwork while zooming in on her. But Imani said nothing. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain. She didn't justify her presence. Instead, she simply rose. Every movement was measured. Her fingers found the mat, pushed her upright with the controlled precision of someone who had picked themselves up too many times to count. Her GI was slightly rumpled now, but her composure remained immaculate. As she straightened, a small metallic glint caught the overhead light. A silver military dog tag slipped briefly from beneath her shirt before vanishing again under the fold of fabric. Only a few caught it. No one knew what it meant, but it meant everything. Blake turned his back to her, addressing the class as if she had ceased to exist. Some people, he said with theatrical disdain, should know their limits. Imani's eyes locked on him briefly. Calm, unreadable. Then she stepped silently back into formation, and the class moved on. You could almost hear the whispered thoughts. She doesn't belong here. She's out of place. She's too soft, too slow, too black. None of it was said out loud, of course, but it didn't need to be. The tone, the glances, the snide asides masked as jokes, they all told the same story. This was Apex Jiu-Jitsu Academy, a premium institution for driven professionals, high-income hobbyists, and trust fund thrill seekers. Imani, with her thrift store training bag and quiet demeanor, didn't match the curated image the academy liked to project. But she hadn't come here to match anything. She came for something no one in the room could see. 2 hours earlier, her morning had begun, like every other. Dawn is breaking through the smoggy skyline of Dorchester. Her alarm hadn't buzzed. Imani didn't need it. Her body still woke at 0500 sharp, a habit engraved by years of military routine. In her modest 2-bedroom apartment, tucked above a corner bodega with flickering streetlights and squeaky stair rails, she brewed a pot of strong black coffee, the kind that left grit in your teeth and purpose in your veins. Her kitchen was bare secondhand appliances, chipped tiles, a single cracked mug that read, "World's Best Daughter," a gift from a father now gone nearly 5 years. She sat by the window looking out as the early commuters filed past in thick coats and hurried steps. She saw the same faces every morning, the nurse with headphones always bobbing to an invisible beat, the old man who smoked 3 cigarettes before the sun cleared the rooftops, and the boy with oversized glasses who waved at her window, not knowing her name, but somehow knowing she'd wave back. This was her piece, her corner of the world, her invisibility, and she liked it that way. After finishing her coffee, she changed into her training gear, nothing fancy, just her faded gi patched in places, always clean, always folded with care. She checked the time, ran fingers over the old scar beneath her right shoulder, and whispered a name, Robert, her father, her anchor. Then she picked up her bag and headed toward a place that made her feel like a stranger every single time she walked through the door. Apex was everything Dorchester wasn't. chrome fixtures, climate-controlled mats, digital check-in kiosks. The receptionist barely acknowledged her with more than a glance. Most days she'd hear, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" before they even scanned her membership card. She never answered those questions, because she was never unsure. She walked in with her back straight, her expression soft but firm. Most people saw her as just another newcomer. They didn't know what it meant when her fingers unconsciously flexed as she entered the mat area, calluses worn from years of hand-to-hand combat training, in places where mistakes didn't mean bruises, but body bags. They didn't know about the training facility in Kandahar where she'd taught close-quarter tactics to male soldiers twice her size. They didn't know about the tour in Ramadi where she'd carried a fellow Marine on her shoulders across 300 meters of open fire. They didn't know the pain that lingered both in her joints and in her heart from the IED that ended her military career and the marriage that didn't survive her return. What they did know was this: she was quiet. She didn't brag. She didn't dominate the conversation. She asked smart questions but rarely gave unsolicited answers. She moved efficiently drilled techniques meticulously, but never made herself the center of attention. To a man like Blake, that was weakness. To Imani, it was control. Control he didn't understand, control that threatened him. So, over the past 2 months, he had made her a target, a convenient one, a female veteran, a woman of color, older than most of the students, wearing no rank, just a white belt. She had "Know Your Place" written all over her in their eyes. The truth was, she'd known her place long before any of them had set foot on a mat, and it wasn't here to prove anything to them. Still, today's stunt was different, public, deliberate, recorded, and now it was spreading. During the break, she heard the snickers grow louder. "That's what happens when you sign up for jiu-jitsu after brunch yoga," someone whispered just loud enough. She folded like a lawn chair. Why doesn't she just quit? Imani sat quietly on the side knees, pulled up, watching the others drill. Her assigned partner had missed class again. Or maybe she'd just opted out of pairing with the woman everyone now associated with failure. Blake walked by, dropping a spray bottle and a towel in front of her. "The mats are a mess," he said, without looking. "Since you're not using them properly anyway, might as well clean them." She stared at the towel. The room went silent again. Then, without a word, she got to her feet and began wiping the sweat and footprints from the floor. She didn't care about cleaning. What hurt was the intent, the weaponized humiliation. When everyone left, she was still wiping the edges. When she noticed a figure in the doorway, Maxwell Reed, the academy's owner. Mid-50s, graying temples, custom-tailored tracksuit, a Rolex half concealed under his sleeve. He watched her for a moment, arms crossed, then gestured to his office. "Imani, right. Got a moment." She followed him in, standing straight out of old habits. He sat down slowly behind his desk. "I've been observing you," he said, voice measured. "Blake's brought some concerns to my attention, about your fit here." She said nothing. "Apex has a certain standard, certain clientele. We don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable." His gaze lingered on her face. The pause said everything. "You're welcome, of course, but maybe consider our women's only beginner sessions. They're more tailored." Still, she didn't speak. "I'm also going to need you to sign this," he added, sliding a document forward. "Standard waiver. Allows us to use class footage for marketing purposes. Photos, videos, all that." She read it. There, buried in legalese, was permission for them to use today's footage, the one already being shared in student chats. She signed, her signature crisp. Her expression was blank. Maxwell nodded, satisfied. "Thanks. I'm sure you'll find your rhythm soon." She stepped out into the cold Boston air, the door clicking softly behind her. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She walked back to her apartment, made another cup of coffee, and sat by the same window. And as the city pulsed outside, she whispered 2 words. Not yet, because the fall wasn't the end. It was the invitation. And she had always been one to RSVP in silence and arrive in storm. The next morning, Imani woke up before the sun, again the way she always did. With no alarm, no hesitation, just the muscle memory of a life once ruled by reveille and red zones, her feet hitting the floor with precision, not ceremony. The city outside still slept, but inside her small apartment in Dorchester, the silence felt heavier than usual. Her shoulder ached as she rolled it gently, the scar from the shrapnel warming under her skin like a low pulsing reminder of the war she never truly left behind. She brewed her usual coffee extra strong, no sugar, no cream, just like her father had taught her, and she sipped it by the window where the pale morning light traced the cracks in the glass and the lives of the people down below. On the bookshelf behind her, the dog tags hung beside a folded flag next to a photo of her father in uniform. Staff Sergeant Robert Brooks, smiling in a way that suggested he knew things the rest of the world had yet to understand. She touched the tag around her neck absent-mindedly, and in that moment, she didn't think about the laughter on the mats or the sting of Blake's words. She thought about Iraq in 2009, about the dust in her eyes, the weight of a fellow Marine in her arms, the blood that wouldn't stop, and the silence that followed when they said, "You did everything you could." The world had a funny way of judging effort, she thought, especially when it came from women like her, quiet, dark-skinned, unwilling to play by rules written for someone else's story. At the VA rehab center later that morning, she moved through her patients with the same quiet intensity, helping a former Navy SEAL stretch scarred ligaments, guiding an amputee through balancing drills, adjusting the posture of an aging Marine who refused to use a cane, all without revealing the fire that simmered beneath her calm. "You've got magic hands," one of the old-timers grunted with a grateful smile. "Not magic," she replied softly. "Just patience." What they didn't see was the discipline that ruled every breath she took, the way she counted each rep, like a soldier counts steps through a minefield, how she tracked every motion, every detail. They didn't know that she trained harder after hours in silence in her living room, with the couch pushed aside and the floor cleared. And they definitely didn't know that she had already been back at Apex the night before alone, when the place had emptied and the mats had cooled and the scent of sweat had faded from the air. She had replayed Blake's takedown in her mind, not to relive the humiliation, but to analyze every nuance of his movement, his foot placement, his angle of entry, the overcommitment of his weight. And then she trained to counter it, over and over and over, until it wasn't humiliation anymore. It was data, ammunition. Back at Apex the next day, things were colder. Not the air, but the way eyes moved past her, not meeting hers. The way laughter paused when she approached and resumed just as she passed. The printout was still on the bulletin board, her face mid-fall, frozen in time, under a caption, scrawled in marker gravity, "Always wins." Blake saw it too, but said nothing, just smirked as he assigned new sparring partners to everyone but her. Miller observed today he called across the mat, not even using her real last name, his tone dismissive final. She didn't correct him. She simply nodded and took her place against the wall, eyes open, ears sharper than ever, watching every grip, every transition, every tiny mistake the others made, and Blake didn't notice. And that's when she first saw him again. James Wilson standing in the back near the office door, arms crossed, his Marine jacket, worn but proud. He said nothing then, just watched, like a ghost from another life. Later that week, he appeared at the VA center, leaning on a cane with a knee brace and the same hard stare she remembered from the combat training yard. "You've been holding back," he said without greeting. "I can see it in your frame. That's not survival, Brooks. That's hesitation." She stared at him, wary. "I've had enough of battles," he scoffed. "You don't stop being a soldier, you just pick new wars." She didn't respond, but the words dug into her chest like truth always did. That night, he invited her to the community center, just a gym with frayed mats, buzzing fluorescence, and real sweat. "We train here, not for belts, for survival." She showed up, quietly, regularly, without telling anyone. And under his guidance, Amani began to rebuild, not the body, but the fight. He drilled her ruthlessly, treated her like any other. Marine made her relive every principle she'd once taught others, only this time, with her as the student again, rediscovering not just technique, but control. "What's the one thing civilians get wrong about fighting?" he barked during a choke defense. "They think it's about strength," she answered automatically, gasping. "Wrong," he snapped. "It's about timing, awareness, purpose." And that night, she wrote it down in a notebook, filled with scrawled diagrams and repetitions. Purpose matters. At Apex, she continued her charade, letting Blake correct her unnecessarily, letting students roll their eyes, letting them think she was weak, invisible, harmless. But every night in the small hours when the world went quiet, she was sculpting something beneath the surface discipline edge, the kind of stillness that breaks like thunder when called. Wilson's words echoed again and again. "Let them think you're a pawn, until they realize you were the storm." And that storm quietly was building. The announcement came over the gym's loudspeaker like an afterthought, but to Imani, it sounded like a challenge wrapped in opportunity. Boston Open registration deadline is Friday. See front desk for details. Blake had just finished a demonstration that included using her as a prop again. He'd forced her into a wrist lock with unnecessary force, holding the position longer than needed, while making a show of correcting her technique, his voice echoing for the benefit of the class. This is what happens when you improvise without understanding fundamentals. A few students chuckled, others looked away uncomfortably. Imani didn't react. She just nodded and stepped back into line, but inside a switch had flipped. She didn't need anyone's approval. She needed one thing: timing. That night, she stopped by the front desk and asked for the tournament registration form. The receptionist, a new girl who didn't yet know the social dynamics of the academy, handed it over without hesitation. Imani filled it out on the spot, checking the box for the women's blue belt division, even though Blake had refused to promote her past white belt. She attached the non-refundable fee and submitted it. The next evening, Blake stormed into the training room before warm-ups. "Miller," he barked, voice louder than necessary. "You think you're ready to represent this academy at a tournament?" Imani, calm and centered, simply replied, "I'd like to test my skills, sir." That word "sir" dripped with discipline, not deference. It made his jaw twitch. "This isn't cardio kickboxing, Brooks. This is real competition. You'll make us look ridiculous." "The registration's already processed," she said evenly. "It's non-refundable." His face flushed, but he couldn't stop her now, not without drawing attention to himself. Instead, he turned to the class. "Everyone, let's make sure Miller gets some extra instruction this week. She clearly needs it." The week that followed was brutal. Blake used her in every demo, contorting her into holds that strained her shoulder, placing her in humiliating scenarios to underscore his superiority. "This is how not to counter," he would say, twisting her arm slightly too far. She never flinched, never winced, just nodded and took the pressure. Her gym bag was found in the locker room trash one evening, a childish prank, she figured. She didn't bother mentioning it. She just picked it out, brushed it off, and laid it neatly by the corner where she always sat. At work, she picked up extra shifts at the rehab center to cover the rising gym costs. She stopped eating out, skipped laundry pickups. Every dollar went to her training. Every night she was back at the community center with Wilson. He'd taken her aside after one particularly grueling session. "Why do you let them treat you like that?" he asked. "Because they've only seen what I allow them to," she answered. He studied her a moment, then nodded. "Just make sure when you flip the switch, you don't hold back." She didn't plan to. The Boston Open drew nearer. Posters began going up in the gym featuring Blake's face past trophies, and a slogan that read, "Apex where champions are made." Imani's name didn't appear anywhere. It didn't matter. She wasn't there to be featured. She was there to end something, or maybe to start something. The morning of the tournament arrived with frost clinging to the pavement. Imani stood in her apartment, tying her hair back with military precision. Her GI was clean pressed and folded on the table. She stared at the small photograph of her father next to her dog tags. "Focus on the mission, not the noise," he used to say. She tucked the tags beneath her GI and headed to the venue. The convention center buzzed with energy, hundreds of athletes, spectators, coaches. Apex had a private section cordoned off, where Blake gathered his team like a general prepping for war. When Imani approached, Claire, a student who had once joked that Imani should stick to Zumba, stepped in front of her. "This area is for competitors," she said, smirking. "Blake doesn't want distractions." Imani didn't argue. She walked away and found an empty space near the warm-up mats. She sat cross-legged, breathing deeply, isolating every sound until all she could hear was her pulse. Wilson arrived mid-morning with his small team. He spotted her, gave a subtle nod, then leaned against the wall. His presence was enough. She didn't need words. The women's blue belt matches weren't until afternoon, but at 11:43 a.m. the PA crackled. "Due to a withdrawal in the men's black belt division, we are calling the next eligible alternate, Imani Brooks. Please report to the registration table." The air shifted, like a collective intake of breath. Blake's voice rang out. "What? That's impossible." "She's not a black belt." He marched to the officials, furious. The tournament director, a woman in her 60s with no patience for politics, stood firm. Her credentials were validated by Sergeant James Wilson. Military certification qualifies under Clause 4B. Blake's face twisted. "She's never trained at that level in my gym. That may say more about your gym than her. Wilson replied, stepping forward. She taught combat survival in the Marine Corps. She's more than qualified. Gasps followed. Students who had laughed at her weeks ago now stared, trying to reconcile the silent woman in their class with the revelation in front of them. Blake looked for a way out, but then the director added, "And according to the bracket, you'll be her first match." He paled. "What?" "Unless you forfeit," she added. For Blake, it was checkmate. He nodded stiffly. "Fine." Imani stood slowly, unfolded herself, walked toward the mat like it was just another mission. The crowd gathered fast. Word was spreading about the quiet black woman facing her own instructor in the black belt division. Phones came out, voices buzzed, but Imani heard nothing. Just breath. Just the mat. She removed her jacket, revealing her arms, lean, powerful, covered in quiet scars that told stories no one there would ever read. On the far side, Blake paced like a wolf cornered in his own den. The referee called them to bow. The whistle blew, and everything fell silent. The moment the whistle sounded, Blake lunged forward, trying to overwhelm Imani with a burst of brute force, his hands shooting out for a collar grip that was meant to control and intimidate. But she didn't resist, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Instead, she absorbed the motion, flowed with it, her fingers dancing over his sleeves, her hips shifting just enough to redirect his momentum, and then, in one swift surgical motion, she dropped her weight, pulled his sleeve, and executed a perfect sleeve drag. His arm extended, his balance broken, and in that fractional hesitation, the space between thought and panic, she moved, coiling around him with clinical precision, sliding into an arm guard transition, so smooth it seemed choreographed by instinct, not training her legs, wrapping her body, compressing, and then the trap snapped shut. His elbow locked her hips tight, and his expression shifted from aggression to disbelief as the torque began to rise. His free hand tapping the mat frantically as a gasp rippled through the crowd, a staccato chorus of disbelief growing louder as the referee stepped in, called the submission, and raised Imani's hand match over in 14 seconds. Blake staggered to his feet, his face a storm of shame and fury. His eyes refusing to meet hers, his pride cracked wide open for the world to see, and he walked off the mat without a handshake past his team, past the director, shoulders rigid, ears burning from the murmurs. "Did you see that she submitted him in seconds? She's not a white belt. She's a damn machine." But Imani didn't react. She simply bowed to the referee, then to the crowd, then turned, picked up her gear, and walked with the same calm silence that had always defined her, not seeking revenge, not gloating, just fulfilling something ancient, something righteous, something earned. As she passed the Apex team, most looked away, shame or confusion tightening their features, but Claire stared, wide-eyed, mouth slightly open, the smugness long gone, replaced by something else, recognition. At the edge of the warm-up area, Master Sergeant Wilson waited with a rare smile, his arms crossed, nodding with pride. "Clean," he said. "Sharp, ruthless." Imani exhaled deeply, touching the dog tags that had stayed close to her chest the entire match. "He underestimated me," she said. "They all did." "That's what they do," Wilson replied, "until they can't." Her next match was scheduled 45 minutes later, and this time when she entered the mat, the buzz in the crowd was electric, not curiosity, not novelty, but respect. Her opponent, a seasoned grappler from a rival academy, offered a handshake before the match even began. Imani returned it. The match lasted nearly 4 minutes longer, tougher, more technical, but she won this time with a choke that left no questions. And again. And again. Until the semifinals, where she finally faced a world-class competitor with years of international experience. That match was war, a blur of sweeps, guard passes, submission attempts, near escapes, and the kind of raw intensity that drew every eye in the building. In the end, Imani lost by points, but when the referee raised her opponent's hand, even that woman turned to hug her and whisper, "You belong at the top." She didn't win gold that day, but she won something far more permanent. By the time she stepped off the final mat tournament, officials had already begun reviewing footage of her matches. Social media was lighting up. The video of her submitting Blake was already trending in martial arts forums. And inside Apex, the walls began to crack. That evening, while Imani quietly returned to her apartment, Blake sat alone in the locker room, the echo of the tap still ringing in his ears. His ego bleeding, his authority shattered. And outside, his office door whispers began, students murmuring about her past, her precision, her silence. The woman they laughed at had just broken the man they feared in 14 seconds, and nothing would be the same again. Monday came with a strange hush inside Apex Jiu-Jitsu Academy, the usual banter replaced by hesitant glances and low whispers. And as Imani entered through the same door she'd used for months, the door that had once greeted her with suspicion and silence, there was now something else in the air. A weight, a reckoning, like the building itself understood that something had shifted permanently, and students who once snickered now stiffened in her presence, some nodding awkwardly. Others pretending to be absorbed in stretching, but none of them dared mock her anymore. Not after the video had made its rounds first in the local martial arts community, then on national forums where headlines like, "Unknown Black Woman Submits Her Own Instructor," in 14 seconds sparked debates, analysis, and uncomfortable questions about how someone so skilled had remained invisible for so long, and why she had been treated as a joke while carrying a resume that outshone most of the Academy's own coaches. Maxwell Reed, the polished businessman behind Apex, was the first to act not out of principle, but panic. Membership inquiries had dropped, sponsors were asking questions, and existing clients had begun emailing concerns about Blake's behavior, citing the video, and accusing the Academy of promoting toxic leadership and systemic bias. That evening, as Imani prepared for class, Maxwell approached her near the locker room, wearing the artificial smile of a man trying to douse a fire with charm. "Imani," he began, his voice low, "do you have a minute?" She followed him into his office, the same office where he once told her she didn't belong in the advanced classes, and as he gestured for her to sit, she remained standing. "We want to make things right," he said. "There's been a misunderstanding about your background and your abilities. We'd like to offer you a position here. Instructor, Women's Self-Defense. Your military experience would be a tremendous marketing asset." She didn't answer at first, just studied him. The way his fingers tapped the desk nervously, the way he avoided her eyes. She could smell the desperation beneath the cologne. "Is this about respect?" she asked calmly. "Or optics?" He blinked. "Does it matter? The outcome is the same?" She smiled slightly, a cold kind of smile. "It always matters." Then she added, "I've already accepted another offer. It wasn't true, not yet, but it would be." He nodded, deflated. "Understood. At least allow me to refund your last membership payment." "Thank you," she said, and left the office before he could spin another sentence. Word spread fast. That same week, Imani officially resigned from Apex and walked out without fanfare, without farewell, just as quietly as she had walked in months ago. But now every eye followed her, not with ridicule, but with the silent question, how did we miss it? The answer wasn't complicated. They had chosen not to see her, chosen to ignore the quiet discipline, the calloused hands, the calm strength. Because she didn't boast, because she was a black woman, because she didn't play the game. And now that choice haunted them. Meanwhile, Blake was suspended pending a formal review, and as former students began coming forward, women especially sharing stories of being belittled, sidelined, shouted at, and used for mock demonstrations, the pattern became impossible to ignore. One woman recalled being told she wasn't built for real competition. Another described being injured during one of Blake's aggressive takedown drills and being told to toughen up or leave. Even some of the male students admitted that Blake's insecurities often translated into targeting those he couldn't control. The governing body for the state's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation opened an ethics inquiry, and though they didn't strip his black belt, a rare and serious measure, they issued a public censure that effectively ended his career. No academy wanted to associate with him. No tournament would host him. He faded fast from relevance, replaced by the very woman he once mocked. Imani didn't gloat. She didn't post about it. She didn't speak Blake's name. She simply kept building, because her victory had never been about revenge. It was about reclaiming space, about planting something solid in the soil where others had tried to bury her. And it had only just begun. In the weeks that followed, Imani moved like someone finally walking in her own rhythm, no longer dodging stares or swallowing words, but stepping forward with clarity. Each decision deliberate, each moment rooted in something deeper than ambition. It was purpose, pure and steady. And it started to bloom the way quiet things often do, without announcements, without applause, just quiet movement, building something unshakable. At the Veterans Rehabilitation Center, where she still worked full-time, things began to shift. Some of the older clients who had once eyed her with skepticism now lingered longer after sessions, asking questions not about injuries, but about training. "You teach that jitsu stuff?" one of them asked one afternoon, rubbing a stiff shoulder. She hesitated at first because for so long the answer had been buried beneath shame, but this time she said, "Yes, I do." That night she typed out a proposal on her old laptop, a basic plan for a weekly program that would combine trauma-informed physical therapy with martial arts fundamentals, designed specifically for veterans dealing with PTSD, physical limitations, or both. She didn't think the center would approve it, but to her surprise, the director called her in the next day and said, "We've seen the video. We've also seen the way the patients respond to you. Let's do it." They gave her a small, multi-purpose room, an hour on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and a green light to begin. Word spread faster than she expected. Within a week, she had 10 sign-ups. Within 2, she had 20. Most were men. A few were women. All carried wounds that didn't show up on scans. She structured the sessions like a battlefield, disciplined, respectful, no nonsense. "This isn't about belts," she told them on the first day. "It's about learning how to breathe when the world won't let you. It's about control, not over others, over yourself." And they listened, because when she demonstrated techniques, there was no ego, no flair, just efficiency. When she spoke, it wasn't with motivational fluff, but with the quiet authority of someone who had survived what they barely had words for. One night after class, a woman who had said nothing for 3 sessions finally approached her. She was a former medic, early 30s, eyes always down, sleeves covering the tremors in her arms. "You don't look at us like we're broken," she whispered. Imani simply replied, "Because you're not." Soon after, Master Sergeant Wilson joined her sessions, not as the leader, but as her assistant. He never wore a title, just a patched GI, a worn brace on his leg, and a quiet nod whenever she introduced him. Together they built something new, something raw, something honest. The techniques were simple: guard retention, sweeps, break falls, but the results were profound. Students who used to flinch at contact began making eye contact. Others who barely spoke started giving feedback, helping one another, finding rhythm in the repetition. The local VA took notice, then the city council. And before long, Imani was offered a small grant to expand the program into a second location. She accepted, but not for the money. She did it because for the first time she saw what it meant to take the pain she'd carried for years and forge it into something that made other people stronger. It was never about fame, never about revenge. It was about legacy, and it was only just beginning. The knock came on a Thursday evening, just as Imani was folding mats at the end of her trauma recovery class, the room still carrying the echoes of laughter and breathless effort, sweat stains on the floor, dog tags hanging loose from her collar, and Master Sergeant Wilson sweeping the far corner in his usual gruff rhythm. She opened the door expecting a late arrival, or maybe the janitor, but instead found Claire, shoulders hunched, hands in her jacket pockets, eyes shifting between defiance and shame. The same Claire who once blocked her path at the tournament, the one who had laughed, whispered, dismissed, and judged. For a moment neither spoke. Then Claire cleared her throat. "I saw the flyer. I wasn't sure if I should come." Imani didn't answer right away. She stepped aside. "You're here now?" Claire stepped in, slowly, gaze moving over the humble room, the folded towels, the crates of basic gear, the wall where someone had pinned up a quote Imani often repeated to her students: "Discipline is choosing what matters most over what you want now." After a long silence, Claire said, "I was wrong about you, about everything. I didn't know." Imani leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You didn't want to know." Claire winced. "I just thought you thought quiet meant weak," Imani finished. "You thought different meant less." Claire nodded, her voice catching. "There's no excuse for it." For the first time in a long while, Imani let the silence stretch, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. Claire took a breath. "I want to help, volunteer, do something." Imani studied her. Not the words, but the way her shoulders were tight, like someone expecting rejection. She thought of all the times she'd been that girl in someone else's doorway, hoping for a second chance. Not because she deserved it, but because she was willing to earn it. "You can start by listening," Imani said. "These students aren't trophies. They're people rebuilding themselves." Claire's face changed just slightly, but enough to know she'd heard it. I understand. No, Imani replied. But if you stay, maybe one day you will. And so, Claire stayed. She showed up the next week. And the next, she rolled mats, filled water bottles, learned names, and learned silence. She didn't ask for praise. She asked for the purpose. And in time, Imani gave her more. She let her assist with stretching drills, let her run warm-ups, let her earn trust the same way Imani had, by showing up when it was hard and staying when it was quiet. One night, Claire stayed after class, wiping sweat from her brow. I think I want to go into physical therapy, she said. Like you. Imani didn't smile, but she didn't hide her pride either. Then you'd better learn patience and grit. Claire nodded. I have a good teacher. And in that moment, under the hum of cheap lights and the scent of worn canvas and old effort, something shifted not in Imani, but around her. The program was no longer just a space for recovery. It was becoming a movement, a circle, a place where people who had been broken in different ways found the courage to begin again. And that Imani thought was worth far more than any medal, far more than 14 seconds. This was a legacy, and it was growing. It was a rainy morning in early spring, the kind that painted Boston in hues of gray and made the sidewalks glisten like glass when Imani stepped into her usual coffee shop near the VA Center. The bell above the door, chiming with its familiar metallic clang, the scent of espresso and damp umbrellas thickened the air, and she moved to the counter with quiet routine, ordering her black coffee extra strong, no sugar, same as always. The barista smiled, slid her the cup with an extra shot on the house like she often did since the tournament. For the woman who shut down the internet, she joked softly. Imani nodded, offered a small thank you, and turned only to freeze. Standing near the corner table soaked from the rain was Blake. Same rigid posture, same clenched jaw, but something was different now. His stance was looser, his eyes heavier, like the months had peeled away whatever armor pride once gave him. He saw her, and the moment stretched long and uncomfortable, as if neither of them belonged in this quiet place filled with warmth and indie music. He approached slowly, carefully, as if afraid she might vanish if he stepped too hard. You made a fool of me, he said not softly enough. Heads turned, conversations paused. Imani didn't blink. I didn't make anything, she replied calmly. You built that pedestal yourself. He ran a hand through his wet hair jaw, clenching. You knew what you were. You let me believe otherwise. I never lied, she said, voice steady. You just never asked. Silence. Then a chuckle sharp and hollow. You know I had sponsors lined up. Media offers. After the tournament, nothing. Dead phones, canceled classes, and you became a damn hero overnight. She sipped her coffee, still calm. I became visible. That's not the same thing. His face twisted. You think you're better than me? No, she said. But I know I never needed to prove I wasn't less. That landed hard. He took a step back, jaw flexing like he wanted to say more, fight more. But there was no crowd to impress, no mats to control, no followers left to clap for him. Just the truth, just a consequence. Goodbye, Blake, she said, and walked past him without another word, the door swinging shut behind her, like punctuation. That was the last time they ever spoke. Word traveled fast. His attempts to discredit her, to claim she'd violated tournament rules, had all failed. The investigation had turned up more than he anticipated. Decades of patterns, students who had remained silent now felt emboldened to speak. And while his black belt wasn't revoked, his reputation had no such protection. His name no longer meant anything in the community, but Imani's it was rising quietly, steadily, not through viral moments, but through lives changed. Her veterans program now runs in 3 locations across Boston. She'd been asked to consult on a national pilot project for martial arts and trauma recovery. She still lived in the same apartment in Dorchester, still walked to work, still brewed her bitter black coffee. But something in her stride had changed just slightly. Not pride, not ego, but ease. Like she had finally stepped out of someone else's shadow and found she cast her light just fine. 6 months after the tournament, the doors of the Dorchester Community Training Center opened on a quiet Tuesday evening, and the room filled with a dozen students, some veterans, some civilians, some walking with limps or scars you could see, and others with pain buried far deeper, but all of them drawn there not by ads or promises, but by word of mouth, by stories told in barbershops and recovery groups, and whispered from one survivor to another. There's someone who understands. Imani stood at the front of the mat, her dog tags now worn openly over her GI like armor. Not a statement of defiance, but of truth, of belonging, of heritage. And beside her stood Master Sergeant Wilson, his presence grounding silent, never smiling unless it was earned. The curriculum was different here. There were no belt promotions, no trophies, no marketing schemes, just movement, breath. Drills designed not for competition, but for recovery, for trust. Some students flinched the first time they were grabbed. Others cried silently when learning how to fall and rise again. And Imani didn't rush them. She let the silence speak. Let the room become a space of unlearning before relearning can begin. One woman, a retired military police officer, froze during a simple choke defense drill. Imani knelt beside her, didn't touch, didn't instruct, just said, "We move when you're ready, not when they expect." And the woman moved. A few weeks later, Claire, now a steady presence, showing up early, staying late, learning to instruct, with softness instead of control, came to Imani after class. They listen to you because you don't perform. You belong here. They feel it. Imani nodded, then said something she rarely said out loud. Because I was them. All of them. In pieces. That truth echoed. And it started to ripple further. Word reached a local university's trauma psychology department, then the city's Department of Veteran Services, then a small nonprofit offering grants to grassroots healing initiatives. Funding arrived, equipment improved, a fourth location opened in Roxbury, then a fifth near Jamaica Plain. At each center, the same philosophy reigned: no cameras, no spotlight, no hero worship, just sweat and silence and healing. Imani began teaching workshops beyond Boston, often traveling on weekends. At one seminar in Chicago, a young instructor asked, "What was the turning point for you?" And Imani replied without pause, "The day I stopped shrinking to fit someone else's comfort." The crowd was quiet for a long time. Then someone stood to clap, then another, and another. But she didn't smile, not yet, because she knew the applause wasn't the point. The point was the young black girl in the back of the room, with wide eyes and a notebook full of questions. The point was the wheelchair-bound veteran practicing hip escapes with the focus of a warrior. The point was building spaces where strength looked different, quiet, enduring, humble. She still wore her scars, still bore the quiet burden of memory. But now, every time she stepped onto the mat, she brought with her the proof that pain could become power, not by erasing it, but by honoring it. And every time the doors opened, someone new walked in. Someone the world had written off. Someone who was about to learn how to stand again. It was a bright afternoon in late autumn when the email arrived, subject line proposal from Apex HQ. Immediate attention requested. Imani stared at it for a long moment, her finger hovering over the trackpad, unread messages stacked beneath it. But this one pulsed differently, not because of the name on the sender field, Maxwell Reed, but because of what it implied, unfinished business. She opened it. The tone was formal, polished, and cautious. Maxwell expressed his admiration for how far she had come, referenced her rising profile in the martial arts and veteran rehabilitation communities, and then got to the point: Apex was planning a new flagship facility in the South End, and they wanted her not just to teach, but to lead. You would have full autonomy. The message read, the opportunity to shape culture, curriculum, and staff. We believe your vision is exactly what our brand needs. Imani read the email twice, then once more. There was a time when an offer like that would have shaken her, would have felt like justice, like closure, like victory. But now it just felt late. She didn't respond right away. She sat with it. That evening after her last class, while rolling mats with Wilson, she brought it up. "Reed wants me to run the new Apex location." Wilson didn't look surprised. He kept rolling. "Of course he does. Your name has weight now. They want to wear it like a patch." Imani nodded slowly. "He says I'd have full control." "You won't," Wilson replied. "Not really, not while the sign on the door still says Apex." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The next morning she typed her reply. It was short, respectful, firm. "I appreciate the offer, but my mission doesn't fit into your brand, and I no longer shrink myself to fit spaces I've outgrown." She hit send, closed the laptop, breathed. There was no bitterness in her chest. just peace. Later that week, she met with a local foundation that had been quietly observing her work. They offered to fund an official nonprofit built around her curriculum, veteran-centered, trauma-informed martial arts training. The paperwork would take time. The infrastructure would grow slowly, but it would be hers. No gatekeepers, no old names clinging to relevance. Just impact, just the truth. When she told Claire and a few of the others, they celebrated not with noise, but with presence. Hugs. Tears. The kind of joy that builds when people see their struggle transformed into something larger than themselves. That night, Imani returned home to her modest apartment in Dorchester. She poured a cup of coffee, black and bitter as always, and sat at her window watching the street below. The city moved as it always had, cars, commuters, neon flickers. But she felt different, grounded, not because she had arrived, but because she had defined the path. And this time, it was on her terms. The new center opened in winter, tucked inside a former warehouse near the edge of the Roxbury district. Its brick walls weathered its windows wide and unfiltered, letting in the cold and the truth in equal measure. There was no grand ribbon cutting, no camera crews or stage press releases, just a hand-painted sign above the door that read, "The Mission Center," and below it, in small steel letters, "Founded by Imani Brooks." The space was simple mats stretched across the floor, a wall lined with hooks for coats and dog tags, a quiet corner where a wooden box held stories written by students who had survived more than combat, and a small framed photo on the far wall. Staff Sergeant Robert Brooks, standing tall in marine dress blues, his daughter's arm looped quietly through his. It was the only photograph in the room. Imani stood there early that morning alone, her hand resting against the glass, remembering the sound of his voice in the quiet of her childhood. Don't chase noise. Build something that matters. She turned, tied her belt, and walked onto the mat as the first students began to arrive. They came in waves, veterans, first responders, single parents, teachers, trauma survivors, and even a few from the old Apex days who had followed her transformation and now sought their own. The curriculum remained the same: discipline, breathing control, no belt obsession, no applause. But the energy had changed. Now, when students walked in, they saw not just a program, but a living example of what it meant to rebuild from nothing, to rise with no one's permission. One afternoon during a break between sessions, Claire sat beside Imani and said, "You know, they call you the 14-second ghost online now." Imani raised an eyebrow. "Sounds ridiculous." "It's meant with awe," Claire said. "Like, she appeared out of nowhere and shattered the system." Imani shook her head, half smiling. "It took more than 14 seconds to get here." Claire nodded, "But those 14 seconds changed lives, including mine." Imani didn't reply. She didn't need to. The stories tell themselves now. Word reached Washington, then the VA National. Then a national conference on trauma recovery invited her to be a keynote speaker. She declined twice until Wilson finally said, "Sometimes the mission requires a mic." So she spoke, quietly, firmly. She didn't talk about the tournament. She talked about the nights she couldn't sleep, about cleaning mats after being humiliated, about carrying the weight of being underestimated and the deeper weight of staying silent too long. And then she talked about building, about what happens when you stop waiting for permission and start creating space. The audience didn't erupt in applause. They stood, slowly, silently, moved not by charisma, but by clarity. That night, she returned to Boston, back to the small apartment she still refused to leave, even as offers poured in for larger homes, book deals, and television rights. She brewed her coffee, sat at her window, and beside her, in a small wooden frame, sat a note written in a shaky hand by one of her first students, a double amputee who once said nothing and now led warm-ups every Tuesday. "Thank you for not seeing us as broken. We were never broken, just waiting to heal." Imani traced the edges of the paper with her finger, then looked out at the city, her city, and whispered, "We're just getting started." It was exactly 1 year to the day since the tournament, when Imani stood at the edge of a hillside cemetery in western Pennsylvania, a soft snow falling around her, her breath rising in slow clouds, the wind tugging gently at the edge of her coat. She held a single photo in her hand herself, on the mat, mid-kneel, surrounded by a circle of students from the Mission Center, their expressions lit not by victory but by relief, by peace, by the joy of reclamation. and in the corner of the image barely visible hung the dog tags now swinging gently from her neck. She knelt, brushed the snow from the granite headstone, and placed the photo down beside a smooth river stone, as was tradition. The letters on the grave read, Staff Sergeant Robert Brooks, 1955-2004, Semper Fidelis. You were right, she said quietly. Eyes on the name. The mission was always bigger than me. Behind her, no crowds waited, no cameras rolled, there was no broadcast, no articles, just silence, and it was perfect. Because Imani Brooks had never needed noise to be powerful. Her legacy wasn't written in headlines or trophies. It lived in the dozens of students now leading their recovery classes in cities across the country, in the soft discipline of a woman who taught a man with tremors how to roll in the quiet transformation of a girl who once mocked her, but now taught beside her in every broken breath that found rhythm again on a mat she made safe. She stood, brushed her hands against her thighs, and turned back toward her car. The world would continue. New challenges, new students, more battles always. But the foundation was laid, and it was stronger than anything built on ego or fear. Back in Boston, Claire was running the afternoon class. Wilson was leading a seminar for first responders. The Mission Center had a waiting list that stretched 3 months out, and the phrase 14-second solution had become something of a joke among students, a reference to the technique. But more than that, to the idea that clarity and truth, when delivered at the right moment, can change everything. Imani returned home that evening, walking the last 2 blocks in the cold coffee in hand, shoulders relaxed, mind steady. She passed a group of teenagers gathered around a street pole arguing over grappling positions. One of them saw her, did a double take, and nudged his friend. That's her, he whispered. That's the woman from the video. She met his eyes, nodded once, and kept walking. She didn't stop. She didn't correct him, because she knew what he meant. Not the woman who won. Not the one who beat Blake. What he meant was the woman who showed us something better. The woman who proved that strength can be silent, that healing can be loud, and that sometimes the loudest thing in the room is the one who never had to raise her voice. Some people spend their whole lives trying to be seen. Imani Brooks didn't need the spotlight. She built her legacy in silence, one broken body mended, one student empowered, one quiet victory at a time. Her story isn't just about a takedown in 14 seconds. It's about what happens when we stop waiting for permission to rise. So now we turn to you. What have you been holding back? What strength have you been hiding to make others comfortable? If Imani's story moved you, share this video. Leave a comment below and subscribe to Flow Story, because we tell stories of the unheard, the underestimated, and the unstoppable. And you never know which one might change your life.